Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Lynda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends, and happy Father's Day. I know I'm one day late, and maybe more if you're not hearing this on Monday, but I still want to say happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, and I hope your kids and significant others and siblings and everyone else in your life made you feel really celebrated for all that you do on that special day. Today's a big episode because we have a lot to cover. I've got a lot of announcements. I've got an announcement. One's about Counselor Connect. One's about Scholar Match. One's about our recent conversation I had with Susan about architecture. One's about Christoph Gutentag, who's the dean at Duke. And then we got a few different tips from listeners. Yeah, I'm going all out, making up for lost time. Actually, 3 different tips from listeners here today, including a story from the counseling room that happened yesterday. I got permission to share, but I'm also turning that into a tip. And then I got a big number for you today. And then YCBK Plus comes out this week. So I'm just going to let you know some of the articles that you can read about. If you click the links in there, I'll mention a few of them. And then, of course, I mentioned to you last week, I want to start a 2-part conversation with you a little bit about what is holistic admissions, definition, misinterpretations, why it's so complicated, why it's also so easy, why it means different things at different schools, and just try to unpack that. So I'll be doing that both this week and next week. And then we'll have part 2 of 4 of Lynda's excellent interview with J Hall, podcaster, dean of admissions, educator, author of multiple books, and author of the most recent book, College Unpacked. And they'll be focusing on transitioning successfully from high school to college so that you can have a great first year experience. And so that's what we got for you today. Got a lot to cover. So let's dive in. So let's start out with some of the announcements. So Counselor Connect, we have a meeting. It feels like it's been a while because we took Memorial Day off. We always meet on the 4th Sunday of every month. We're excited to welcome several brand new members into our team. And we're going to be excited. We're going to talk about a lot this week coming up on next Sunday. So if you're a college counselor out there, public school counselor, CBO counselor, independent school college counselor, or IEC, our group consists of all 4 types, and it's intentionally diverse by counselor type, by geography, by experience, and we alternate between having a guest speaker come in and speak, and then we can pepper them with questions, and then just meeting in small groups and building some community. So you can see that application. It's right up on the Your College Bound Kid website if you're interested in participating. So yeah, put it on your calendar. June 29th. Scholar Match. We've got some great news about Scholar Match. Our longtime listeners know we had a couple college counselors from Scholar Match who were on here for about a deep dive, hour and a half or so, a breakdown of this program that takes counselors, college counselors from our audience and other places, provides some training, and assigns you 1 or 2 under-resourced scholars all across the country that you can work with and help a kid. It doesn't have a lot of family resources in this process. And I announced on here, unfortunately, they lost a big chunk of their funding, and they were going to be focusing just on the Bay Area. Well, Scholar Match sent out this letter to all the college coaches this week. I'm just going to read a part of it. We are thrilled to share some wonderful news. Thanks to generous gifts from two of our dedicated volunteers, we're able to resume our national Destined for College program this summer. With their support, we will expand our reach to serve first-generation high school students across the country once again for 2025-2026. Back in February, we shared a sobering update about our college access program and our need for continued funding support for our national services. 3 months later, we are incredibly grateful and deeply humbled to see that two very special volunteers reach out to offer not only their support, but also their significant personal contributions, which have enabled us to resume our national services through June of 2026. We remain focused on securing funds to ensure our national program continues to serve students beyond 2026. So they've secured the funding for this year. I know a number of you I talked to got a lot of joy out of that, but it was going to be challenging if it was only California, if you weren't in that time zone. So once again, if you haven't volunteered, check out scholarmatch.org. Okay, like I said, we're full of announcements this week. So Christoph Gutentag, one of the legends in the field, 4 decades of experience at Duke for the last 33, 34 years, at UPenn before that. Had him on our podcast, I don't know, maybe a half year or so ago. He's stepping down. And he's says he's not 100% sure what he's going to do next, but he's very interested in AI and how AI is going to impact admissions for the future. And he says he's also very interested in looking at how PQ's personal qualities impact admissions decisions. So he wants to do some work in that field. He's still going to be available as a speaker. So I'm going to take him up on his commitment to come back on here in 2026. And so it won't be long before 2026 is back. All right, a few tips. And one of them is related to this conversation that Susan and I had about architecture. We had a question from a listener who has a student very interested in architecture and was just reaching out for some tips. So a listener wrote in and they said, feel free to share this with the audience. And so this is a recommended resource. It does come from a parent named Kelly, and I'll read it and you can check it out. Here's what it says. As a parent who just finished a journey towards enrolling my rising 13th grader in a B-Arch program at her dream school, I almost had to pull over while listening to the podcast this morning to share this resource. And she mentions her student's name, was able to learn so much, get so much exposure, all for free from an amazing program that she participated both as a junior and as a senior. And the program is called the ACE Mentor Program. And it gives a firsthand look at careers in architecture, construction, and engineering with small group projects and mentoring. And the website is acementor.org, ACEMENTOR.org. So that's our first of our many recommended resources on this episode. My next recommended resource for this episode is fooling around with some of the language models that are out there, language learning models out there. I've been fooling around with both Perplexity and ChatGPT. They're fantastic for do-it-yourselfers. They're also fantastic just for others who have counselors but want to seek out additional perspective. Try fooling around with it. Have I found some errors? Yes. Do I find a lot of errors? No. Mostly what I find sometimes is that it may be a little thin on details, but there's a lot of really, really good content in there. So if you haven't used it at all for college questions, I encourage you to check it out. Now, I've been using Perplexity and ChatGPT. Other people swear by different ones like Grok and Gemini. There's zillions of them out there. Just do your due diligence and check it out. I think you'll find it's a worthwhile resource for you to check out. All right. My next tip is also a personal story that happened in the counseling room yesterday. So I did a segment a few weeks ago, and these weeks are flying together, so it might have even been last week. I can't remember if it was last week, the week before, the week before that, but I know it was pretty recently. I took maybe 10 to 12 minutes and just gave some tips on the personal statement. But there's just zillions and zillions and zillions of them that you can share. So I'm going to continue to drop some tips on the personal statement because this is writing time, friends. You want to know what you should be doing if you're a rising senior for the college application? Writing and research. Personal statement, PIQs for the UCs, additional information section for the Common App, challenges and circumstance essay, the brand new 250-worder for the Common App, researching the college-specific prompts that are out there. By the way, I've mentioned the website, internationalcollegecounselors.com. They are dropping, every time I go on there, they're dropping another 2026 question. Georgetown is out with theirs. UGA is out with theirs. Texas A&M told me when I was there, theirs isn't changing. So it's both researching the new ones so you can get working on them if you're class of 2026, but also taking a good look at the 2025 and 2024 ones so you can learn what the college really values. So it's writing time. So I had a meeting with a student in the Midwest yesterday. I'd already had him complete all the brainstorming exercises that I assigned. And this is the meeting where we identify what his topic is going to be for his personal statement. And he leaves that meeting ready to go do a draft. Don't get into all the details, but for this purpose, what I want to emphasize as a tip is whatever, you always want to be asking yourself this question. What is it that I want admission officers to learn about me from this? And then whatever those things are, you want to put them at the very top of your page, whether you're handwriting or you're typing. Because as you start thinking about sharing your story, and remember, the story is how you breathe yourself to life, right? The story is how you allow me as an admission officer to see you on my campus. The story is how you make it personal, persuasive, interesting, and memorable. But you got to pick your story. You got to pick the details of your story. And it's creative writing, but it's persuasive writing. So put whatever those so what factors are that you want to drive home at the top, because they will guide, govern, and give you some direction as you start thinking about the details of your story and how you want to make yourself come alive, how you want to make yourself more vivid. So let's see if I can make it a little more concrete. This student, and I'm going to call him T, his first name does start with a T, by the way. Here's what I extracted from all of the brainstorming exercises. He's absolutely passionate about nature. Of course, this is something I knew. I mean, he loves schools like Dartmouth and Williams and Middlebury and Colby and Hamilton and Colorado College. And these are the kinds of schools he loves when he visits. He likes these small schools that are nature lover schools. But it was all over his brainstorming. He absolutely loves nature. Another thing was all over his brainstorming exercises is his special relationship with his dad. And then another thing that was all over his brainstorming exercises was he was deeply moved by a 60-mile bike race that he participated in called Core 4. And it was the hardest thing, he answered the question, one of the questions on our brainstorming is, what's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life? And he talked about Core 4. He talked about how his legs locked up with cramps and everything. So I shared several different things I thought could be great topics for him. And I'm going to say more about topics on another tip in the upcoming future, like maybe even next week. And I always let the student pick because the student has to write, right? And they have to have some passion. So I present several things that could be great topics that are authentic to who you are. There's some passion there. There's some creativity, unique and interesting. And the admission officer doesn't know anything about you, and you feel deeply about it, and it can elevate your value. And so I asked him, and so he wanted to write about this Core 4. He wanted to write about this grueling 60-mile bike race. So then my next question is, well, what do you want admission officers to learn about you? So we have some back and forth about all that, and several things emerged. One of them was what he learned when every single part of him wanted to quit, but how he pushed through and how that's positively impacted him to this day. So I'm like, okay, well, we got to make that tangible, right? So let's use some examples. So you can say, for example, when I'm in the hardest class I've ever had before and I want to quit, I don't quit. Or when I want to drop out of college, or when the job is going to be tough, I know I can't just quit, or relationship's tough. So, we want to make that more tangible. So we want to go with that, what he learned by pushing through when everything in his body wanted to quit. He wanted to bring out his love for nature, because this is like a riding through nature type of race, and how when he's in nature, he thinks better and he has processing time to reflect. And his close relationship with his dad, because that sort of brings out, a lot of really admirable personal qualities come out through that. And the writing is really about making your personal qualities pop. And it's about the school being able to visualize you on their campus and inspiring them about what you'll bring to their campus. So I told them, write these 4 things at the top, because they'll guide, govern, and anchor you so you don't go adrift with extraneous details. So that's the tip. So we got multiple tips today. I got the one on AI. I got the one about putting your core things right at the top of the page in big, bold font, so they'll anchor you when you craft your story. And then we have the architecture story. So I'm full of tips today. But I've also got a big number for you. And the big number is 200,000. Now, one thing I love it is when you guys send me articles on college admissions that you found helpful. I like it for a lot of reasons. And fortunately, a lot of you guys do this to me. You forward me articles that you've enjoyed reading through the week. For one, it gives me a real sense of what's resonating out there. We can get like topics from this to discuss on the podcast, whether it's just conversations or questions from a listener or interviews. And sometimes I haven't read the article myself, so I'm like, oh, gee, I never read that article, and I could read great articles. So one article that so many people sent me this week, including I got it again about maybe 2 hours ago, is this article that ran in the New York Times, and it's called, "Why Did Syracuse Offer $200,000 in merit aid to teens who had turned it down?" That's a catchy article. And it's by Ron Lieber. We've had Ron Lieber on the podcast. And if you know anything about Ron, he's like a dog going after a bone. When he's on something, like he's like white on rice. He is relentless in his pursuit. So I keep in touch with Ron by email. I'm going to reach out to him and see if he'll come on actually and discuss this article, because I think it's really important. And I know New York Times is behind a paywall, but if you can get your hands on this article, I think it's important to read. It's not a Syracuse story. It looks like it's a Syracuse story. It's a story of what you're seeing out there across the country, with schools who are trying to strike a balance between how can we meet our class with a finite amount of dollars. And so you do your best to use your projections as to how much you think you need to offer someone in order to get them to come. But if it looks like you may not meet your class, you got to start getting a lot more aggressive or you don't meet your class. And then with this year, losing the Chinese students, or the fear of losing the Chinese students, and just internationals in general, really created a lot of chaos in admission offices. I think one of the biggest things that would surprise a lot of our listeners is that some very selective colleges don't meet their class. Very selective colleges don't meet that class. It's really not that uncommon at all. You think, well, is it not meeting your class just a sign of total chaos and a school's not safe? No. It's actually pretty impressive when people are meeting their class with all the obstacles that college admissions are facing right now. So if you can get your hands on that article, I'd love for you to read it. I think you'll find it really helpful. You'll see the challenge that a lot of schools are under right now to take a finite amount of financial aid and meet your class? And what happens if you either have more attrition than you think or your yield is a little lower than you expected? So anyway, it's a good insight into how all this works. You may remember I told you guys a while ago, there's a, for one, if money's important to you, unless you're on both extremes on the barbell, very well resourced or very not well resourced, you really need to take a look at whether you want to apply early decision. Because, yeah, schools say we meet full financial need, but that doesn't mean they can compete with the generous merit money. And I talked to you earlier about how a number of schools are just offering better offers when a student does nothing other than they don't turn in their deposit. I mean, if I was going through the process right now and I was not applying early decision, and this is especially true, by the way, with these expensive private schools that have a high tuition discount model, I would not be sending in anything till May 1st because I don't know if I've had the school's best offer. And I absolutely would be appealing because I wouldn't know that I have their best offer until I've appealed. So it just shows another side of how the sausage is made from a financial standpoint. So see if you can get your hands on that article. It's really a very interesting one. And hopefully we'll have Ron on to talk about it with you guys. All right, YCBK Plus comes out this week. This is our opportunity to share some articles that we don't get a chance to discuss. And we're putting 10 articles in there. Plus, we have some other good links in there and other helpful information as well. We intentionally put things that are not behind a paywall. Boy, there are a lot of articles out about colleges struggling financially. We've got one about Nebraska looking to cut another $20 million from its budget. Boy, there's so many articles on finances. There's an article about 18 colleges seeking to support Harvard in their lawsuit against the Trump administration. There's an article on no more in-state tuition for undocumented students in Texas. Texas has provided in-state tuition for people who were, born and raised in Texas and went to Texas schools for the last 26 years. Well, they're not doing that anymore. So there's an article there. And then there's one I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about because I think it's really important. So the House bill really was going to inflict a lot of pain on higher ed. And the Senate bill looks like it's going to as well, but nowhere near like the House bill. So late Tuesday night, the Senate released their version of their bill. And while there are some similarities with the House proposal, you'll see, for example, they're really cutting back the ability to get loan forgiveness and restricting some of the income-based repayment plans. So that part hasn't changed, in the bill. But there are some things that are different. For one, they're not putting their limit on the Pell Grant that the House was going to put. That was going to really hurt a lot of, under-resourced families in paying for college. That bill was going to have excluded thousands of part-time students, like the House version I'm talking about. So they walked that back. I talked to you before about the controversial risk-sharing plan they had. If people didn't repay loans, it was going to fall back on the college to have to make up money if people were defaulting. The Senate said, no, we're not going for that. We're not going to force colleges to pay for students that don't pay their loans back. So they got rid of that. There's a lot of talk about them walking back the endowment tax. We'll see what happens. It's not finalized yet, but not going with what the House said. There's a lot of chatter about that. Friends, to get the YCBK free monthly newsletter, YCBK Plus, just go to yourcosmonekid.com and you will see a drop-down menu that says About YCBK. Now, there's only two things in the drop-down menu. The first is our team. So if you've never read about our team, you kind of know the background about the co-hosts you listen to every day, this is the place where you can read about our team. But underneath our team, you'll see YCBK Plus. Click that and you can sign up for a free monthly newsletter. I know it seems like a lot of minutia to follow this stuff, but this stuff really does have like real consequences for real people. Money's important. All right, friends, let's transition and talk about holistic admissions. Friends, there are so many misunderstandings of what holistic admissions is and how it works. And I'm not going to be able to answer all of this for you, even in this 2-part series I'm talking about this topic. But I hope to at least answer some of your questions. On the one hand, holistic admissions is simple, but on another level, it's very confounding. It is simple because holistic admissions is simply whole person admissions, meaning we look at a person beyond just the metrics, meaning beyond just the numbers, meaning beyond things like class rank and grades and AP tests and number of AP classes and SAT scores and ACT scores when we make admissions decisions. My favorite definition of holistic admissions is just simply this. Holistic admissions looks at the context. It's contextual admissions. Let me see if I can make this more concrete. I had a student I worked with this year that had one grade under A- in 9th and 10th. Very high test scores, student from the Midwest. But they missed almost half of the junior year because the student's in the hospital with a rare disease. So obviously his grades are going to tank in the 11th grade if he's missing 40% of school. So he didn't apply early action because he was doing a lot better with his health. He wanted to post strong 12th grade grades, show he's on an upward trajectory. He had a lot of success in this process. He got in a lot of schools that typically take A, B students, more A's than B's. Why? Because the schools looked at him in his full context. So I know what some of you thinking, Stuck, that doesn't really sound that difficult of a concept to grasp. But here's what makes it complex. There's so many different ways of reviewing an admissions file. For one, here are just 6 to 8 ways, and we're just scratching the surface. Some schools like UNC Wilmington or High Point, for the most part, the territory manager auto-admits the applicants he or she feels fit what the school's looking for. Other places like Princeton do not have territory managers. At some place, every single applicant goes to admissions committee, like the way Davidson handles their ED applicants. That's rare. Most people don't do that. Some places like Haverford reach consensus on their decisions. Most places vote. For some schools, the dean has to sign off on every single kid. For others, the subcommittee chair can make those decisions. For others, it's not the dean or subcommittee chair, but a senior level person that eyeballs all decisions. That's just a fraction of the ways decisions are made from a process standpoint. Some committees have lots of people on them. Some are small. And then there are all kinds of rubrics out there. Some have 2 categories, some have 3, some have 4, and they have different criteria of what they use. Some rubrics focus on results like academics, character, impact. Others have evaluative factors in the rubric. For example, Teacher Rex is one of Emory's rubrics. This is nothing to say about all the other factors. Brown and Dartmouth came out last year, this time, a little bit before this, and publicly said that test scores are a better predictor for grades for us. And they help us identify really strong diversity candidates. So they help us with diversity. Michigan said, that's absolutely not what our research shows. It doesn't help at all with diversity. Brown and Dartmouth are saying test scores are the best predictors for us. UCLA says if you send us test scores and we've told you we don't want them, we can only come to 2 conclusions. Either you don't follow instructions very well, or you don't think the rules apply to you, and neither option is good. So stop trying to sneak your test scores into the file. Places like Davidson and Duke love Teacher Rex. Send them to UIUC, and as Andy Borst, formerly over that office, now at UGA, used to say when he was there, send us Rex, they go to the shredder. When Eric Furto was at Penn, he used to say, resumes grind my gears. Spellman loves resumes. So does Texas. Interviews can last 2 hours at MIT. Most schools don't even have them. Georgia Tech says we couldn't care less about demonstrated interest. You want to know what demonstrated interest for us is? Did you apply or did you not apply? That's about as far as we go with demonstrated interest. Lehigh says we're all about demonstrated interest. Bring it on. Virginia Tech says you're getting admitted into a major when you apply here. So the same Cal Poly says the same thing. That isn't true at all at UGA or UNC. They say, why should we do that when you're probably going to change your major when you get here? And I could go on and on. So that's what makes understanding holistic admissions difficult. The reality is schools like to say they practice holistic admissions for a few different reasons. For one, it feels like the things that make you as a student uniquely you are valued. Once again, I can take context into consideration. I mean, look at the opposite of holistic admissions. You're a number, and I'm going to judge you by a number, by your numbers, and that feels icky. That doesn't feel personal. So schools believe in it to their core. I believe in it to my core. Others feel like it treats you as the individual that you are, which is why I like it, by the way. To me, it's all like making a hiring decision. I can't just hire somebody off of any set of numbers. There's so many different nuances that I need to take into consideration, including what are our needs and what are your strengths. And I can't reduce that to any kind of formula. Second reason is holistic admissions is claimed by almost everybody, because if it's true that you're judged by the company you keep, pretty much all the selective schools practice holistic admissions in this country. So that's the club you want to be associated with. The third reason is a little more cynical, and I honestly do not believe it's a major or even a minor reason, but it'd be naive to not say it's a non-factor. And I'm referring to here is the opaqueness of holistic admissions. It can be convenient when someone's really upset about an admissions decision and they're really unhappy. It's the stakeholder or whoever. And then you can say, hey, decisions are made holistically and there's not any fingerprints as to what exactly it was that led to that person not being admitted. You can be a lot more covert, and quite honestly, it's appropriate to be covert at times. Otherwise, lawsuits and blowback can be really bad. So how are we to think of holistic admissions? I prefer to think of it along a continuum. Some schools use no factors, some use some holistic factors, and some use dozens of holistic factors. Well, how can you know? Well, one, some schools do a great job on their website of letting you know how they evaluate an applicant. Then there's section C7 of the common data set. And then you can look at what they require. Anytime a school requires anything, they're creating work for themselves. When the Schreier's Honest College gives you 9 to 10 essays, 2 of which are 800-worders, they're creating a tremendous amount of work for themselves, but they're absolutely telegraphing to you how much they believe in the value of writing. Ditto for the UC app. You can look at the UC app and say, no 9th grade grades, no 12th grade grades, no standardized testing, no teacher recommendations. That doesn't look holistic. But then they have 4 PIQs, 350 words. That's 1,400 words. That's more than double the personal statement. And then their clubs and honors section is more than double the character count of the Common App. And you have 20 entries, not 10. Look at what a school requires, and you'll get a lot of insight into what they value. All right, I got a lot more to say about this topic. This is the end of part 1. Hopefully you'll enjoy part 2. We'll get into that next week. We'll now transition to Lynda's interview with J Hall, author of the book College Unpacked. They'll continue their discussion on how to successfully transition from high school to college and how to have a great first-year experience.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of J Hall's interview with Lynda, Jay continues giving tips to parents about what they should do when they drop off their student at college. Jay and Lynda talk about the big shopping run, and they give you some tips about what to get on that shopping run. Jay and Lynda discuss roommates, and they give some good roommate advice. Then J Hall and Lynda discuss selecting a dorm room, and Jay discusses whether a student should bring their car to campus. And finally, Jay gives advice about how to find friends on campus. Listen and enjoy.
What do you see as the parents' role on that day to make it a happy I'm not going to say stress-free,
No.
but less stressful day for everyone.
I think so. I've done this 4 times. I have 4 kids. I have moved each of them into dorms. Every experience was a little bit different. Some were great, some were less great. Not elucidating any of that. I think there's a couple of things that are critical. And one is, and just mom and dad, hang on to something. This day is not about you, which is really hard.
Right.
Because that this is our kid and this is our world and go, and we're emotional, and all of that is true. Trust me, I've done the driving away with tears in my eyes 4 times, including twice for daughter literally moving 20 minutes from me. So it wasn't like I was leaving them behind, but there's just something about that transition. But I think realizing this is their day. And so what does that mean? Well, that means when they're ready for you to leave. And I saw a really cool deal where this mother had set up kind of a signal that when the daughter made the bed, it was time for mom to go. And it actually took longer than mom thought it would. That avoids the kind of, weird thing in front of a roommate, in front of other parents, in front of us, and okay, mom, it's time for you to go. And just even say, mom, it's time for you to go, feels worse than, oh, she made the bed. Now I realize what that means. But that means respecting the student's schedule. Most of my kids, when we moved them in, they had an orientation meeting or a dorm meeting or something they had to go to either in the afternoon or evening. And I've heard parents say, well, that big a deal, you can blow that off. That's not a great start for your student, for them to hear, well, these things I have to go do, I don't really have to go do. Is it kind of true? Yes. But we don't want them starting with that kind of mindset. The other thing I'll say, and again, just prepare yourself, especially dads. However the college has set up for move-in day, just follow their rules. Just they ask you to do. I promise you, you can find a better way. I could all 4 times.
Yes.
It's like, if they would just let me use this door, or just let me use this stairwell, or just let me park here, right? But here's the thing. You family, and they may be trying to move in thousands of families, and they've done this before. So just follow the rules, teach student that even if it doesn't necessarily always make sense, it's going to make everybody's life easier. You might be a little aggravated, and that's okay. And I would also encourage you, if you get aggravated, don't let it show. Again, I think you said it well, Linda. Make it fun. It's going to be a little bit stressful just because there's moving parts and lots of things happening, but it really should be a fun time because it is this really exciting transition. Your student getting into a new space. Like you said, some of them have been dreaming about it, not just for 3 months, but for years, what that dorm room is going to look like. Some of them, like my sons, are like, okay, this is the box I'm going to live in. Great. See ya. Daughters were a little bit different.
Sure.
Really how that works, right? But yeah, I think, all of those things, and then just be ready to take them shopping because you're going to have forgotten something, and go make that insane Walmart/Target run with everybody else who's moving in that day.
So my recommendation for parents for shopping, because you're right, you've got to stock that little tiny fridge, with Red Bull or yogurts or Ben and Jerry's, whatever they need.
Or all 3. That sounds great.
Or all 3, right? Get a spare power cord for the laptop. I have bought 2 now, of course, on rush order. So just take it from me. Send them with 2 power cords. One stays in the dorm. One goes in the backpack to invariably get lost in the library. Then they're done that.
I will also add, get ones that are extra long, because when you loft those beds, that plug is going to be a long way away.
For sure. Long cords for everything. So while we're talking about dorms, and we mentioned it, moving in with roommates and things like that, let's talk about roommates, because some of these students, I don't know if they're really prepared. And I feel like some students think they're, it's going to be you're moving in with your lifelong best friend, or you and your best friend from high school are going to room together, which I don't think is usually a good idea. But tell me, what are some thoughts for students to get ready for living with someone you know too well or a perfect stranger?
I think the first thing you said is really important. When you're getting a roommate, you are not signing up for a lifelong best friend. I know that's what we see, is what we see in the movies. It would be awesome if that happened. It's pretty rare. Just that's how it goes. Because when you spend 9 months living with someone in a very enclosed space, it's hard to stay friends at that level. I think the big task in terms of preparation and then also over the span of that first year living together is just learning how to communicate and learning how to compromise. Firstborn kids go off, the world's been their oyster, only children, they've kind of just had it however they wanted it. And then you roll in and now there's suddenly this other human that you have to contend with. And sometimes we've never had to do that. We've never had to compromise. We've never to have a conversation about what time do you go to bed? Well, I go to bed 3 hours later than that. And so how are we going to negotiate that? We could get up 3 hours earlier than I do, and I don't like that. What's the conversation going to be? Is it about having other people in the dorms and just all that kind of stuff? And I think it's important, and this goes back to communication, to have those conversations before a fight breaks out.
Oh, yeah. Those roommate contracts, I know some schools have those.
Yeah.
I think that's a good plan, even if it's your best friend
Right.
from high school.
Because there are things you're going to do as you live together like that even when you didn't spend weeks and weeks on end packed into the same space. And so, yeah, there's a lot to learn there. And I think the other part of education is learning to advocate for yourself. Now, some of us are too good at that, and that's a different, but I think being able to express, I need sleep, and you're staying up 3 hours later, sometimes, well, we don't want to cause conflict. We don't want to be the problem. We don't want to be whatever. And then we let it build and build and build. Either we explode and it turns into a fight rather than a conversation, or we just give up and give up some of our own agency in the space that, we're going to live.
Sure. And I think I'd like students to not be afraid to go with the random option and letting the school choose your roommate. They have been doing this for a long time, way before social media. So just answer, the surveys truthfully. You'll get a roommate who will probably be a good roommate. And maybe you will become great friends, but there are other places on campus that you can find friends. So when we're talking about dorms, and this is one of those things that students need to do in the summer sometime, maybe a little earlier, depending on the school, is choose what kind of dorm they want. And some schools, you may have some options where you could have one of those nice looking suite style dorms, or the more traditional, 2 to a room and the communal bathroom down the hall. I think it's important for students to think about all of the ramifications about that. If you choose that fancy suite style dorm, you know what you have to do? You have to clean the toilet.
Maid's not coming.
Yeah. So I do find some students or when they think about that, all of a sudden they're okay with the communal bathroom. It's not that bad. As we're talking about moving to school, you talked about parking permits, which I know I camped out when I was in college to get a permit
Wow.
for the good lot because I was a commuter when I started. So do you recommend, in general, students bring a car to campus?
I think that's so context specific that it's almost hard to give a good answer. So maybe things to think about as you're making that decision. If you are going to a campus that has good public transportation, where it's easy to get everywhere you need to be, not just on campus, but out into the community. So there's a bus that will take you to the grocery store or some way to get around. I think that car becomes more optional, especially because campuses like that, parking also tends to be very expensive on campus because it's limited. If you're going to the University of Oklahoma, where Oklahoma is a car culture, there's nothing close to anything and none of it's walkable. It's a little bit more necessary to have some way of getting around. Now, there's still a bus system, there's still things like that. It's not the same way that it might be in an urban area. So some of it is, what are you anticipating to do? And this is why those college visits are really important, because you begin to get a feel for that. You look around and realize there's not a grocery in 4 miles of this campus. How am I going to get there? How am I going to get what I need.
DoorDash.
DoorDash. There you go. It's expensive stuff. Now, maybe cheaper than parking. And so this is that weird, calculus that somebody has to do about what the real cost of college. It's not just tuition and fees. It's all this other stuff that's a part of it. So I think in general, it comes down to what the student plans to do, what they kind of life might look like. My daughter had a roommate that didn't have a car, and she functioned just great. She got rides when she needed them, and she could do the bus, and she could do whatever. It worked out fine. I know other students who would be dead in the water if they couldn't just get in their car and day for a minute or two. Because the other thing about Uber and buses and whatever is you're not by yourself.
Right.
So I think it's a cost thing. You ask yourself that question. And then the other thing I think is important to ask for a first year student is, what does first year parking look like? Because if you're going to park your car in a pasture 2 miles from campus and have to take a bus to get your car, maybe you don't want to have it. But if, it's good and it's near your dorm and it's near the space where you're going to be, then, a station.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a conversation that families should have. And, one of the nice things about having a car on campus is it's going to be easy to make friends,
Right.
because there will always be someone that needs a ride. But parking can be a real issue. And I know on some campuses, they make you move your car when it's home football
Right. Yeah.
game. So you really have to be on top of that. The other thing I like, this is the same reason why I think freshmen should live on campus, because I think you should be on campus.
Yes.
And really kind of spending your time there. Most of you are going to be too young to sample the nightlife.
That was very delicately put. Well done.
Thank you. So you should be hanging out on campus. That's just my own opinion.
Completely agree.
But yeah, think twice before you decide to take that car to campus. But other than having a car, how do you recommend students find friends on campus?
I think there's 1,000 ways to do it and a couple of ways to make sure it never happens. I think the big thing is just, and you're right, being on campus, and then when you're on campus, actually out on campus. And I'm an introvert, and I know even as I say these things, like in my heart, I'm like, oh, but I don't know that I would ever do that. Fortunately, when I was a college freshman, back when dinosaurs ruled the earth, my roommate was an extra. He left our dorm room door open all the time. And most of the guys in our hall, the doors were always open, which turned out to be a great thing, because then you could, if someone's in the room and you could stop and you could talk. Now, that may not be your deal, and I'm not saying that's a way to do it. It's a way to begin to meet people. When one of my sons was in college, their dorm had communal rooms. And so the guys would just wait until making cookies or doing something for whatever, and then stroll down and very casually just check out what was going on and take advantage of the cookies that were being made, things like that. There are also, every campus, even the smallest campus has organizations. And they may not be the things you're most excited about being a part of, but it may be the thing that people are going to. And so you might get about it just to meet people. Athletic events, not huge football games. You go to all games, you go to a football game, you're not going to meet anybody because there's 100,000 of your closest friends there. But if you go to a lacrosse match where there's students hanging around, you may have a chance to have a conversation. Now, you may not be the most excited about lacrosse, but it's an opportunity to engage with people. And the other place, and it's the place that I think students think about this the least, is the place they're going to be the most besides, and that's the classroom. On my every class that I've taught, on the first day, I make my students get up and introduce themselves to each other. And it makes the introvert in me and the introverts in the room cringe, and I give them an out if they need it. But I think it's so important to turn to somebody next to you and just tell them who you are and hear who they are. So now you know somebody in that room, and they're not going to necessarily be your best, maybe a point of contact. You're going to spend the next 4 months with them. You might as well get to know them a little bit. And I will tell you, students who are listening, that's how I met my wife.
Oh,
First day of class at Baylor, turned to the person next to me, had a conversation, and before we got married. And I will tell you, that's how my daughter met her husband.
wow.
In my class, on the day that I made them introduce themselves to each other, I actually introduced my daughter and her husband accidentally.
Wow. that is a story for the grandkids. I love that.
So, you never know who you might meet. I'm not guaranteeing your spouse is in the room with you, but it's a great place to connect and begin to get to know folks.
Yeah. Yeah. And, all of this happens, outside of the dorm. So you got to get out and do things. And one of the things, tabling is an actual verb that students may not be aware of, but I think those first few weeks of your first year on campus are so important because everybody is in the same boat.
Right.
Nobody knows a ton of people, and it's your opportunity to make connections. And I always encourage students to join some organizations because you're right. And you'll hear this every single time you go on a college tour. We have 400 clubs. And if you don't find one that you like, you can start your own. And it's everything from economics to my favorite,
Absolutely.
Squirrel watching. So get out there, join, a pre-professional club, a club for fun, learn how to knit or play badminton, whatever it is.
Friends, this concludes this part of J Hall's interview with Lynda. Hope you'll join us next week for the next part. On Thursday's episode, 2 questions for a listener for you. Dale from Virginia has a lot of questions about the demographic cliff, and Hillary will join me to answer those questions. And then we've got a mom from California who has some questions about whether Columbia should be avoided because of all of the protests that are going on that campus right now, and some of the anti-Semitism. And so Lynda and Lisa will talk about that question. And then we'll continue with part 4 of 5, my interview with Dr. Bob McMahon, the president of Kettering University, and we're talking about Kettering University. And then Jen Mandel's back for part 2 of 4. And it's kind of a potpourri of topics jumping and bouncing around. But this week we'll be talking a lot about going to college for business at a really big school versus a mid-sized school. Hope you'll join us on Thursday for episode 545. And friends, remember, your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude. Did you catch that? Your attitude, your mindset, your behavior, not your aptitude, your brain power, will determine your altitude, how high you will soar in life and in your career. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dumitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.